When I let myself into my own house that afternoon, a woman I had never seen before looked up from my kitchen counter and asked, "Can I help you?" as if I were the one who didn't belong there. I stood there with my hand still wrapped around the brass doorknob I'd installed with my husband 20 years ago, the grocery bag slipping slightly against my hip, and for a moment I honestly wondered if I had walked into the wrong place. But the smell told me otherwise. Lemon cleaner layered over something floral I never used, something artificial, like a staged open house. This was 214 Maple Grove Lane in Columbus, Ohio. My home. The one I had paid off the year my husband Arthur passed. The one where every cabinet door had a memory attached to it. The woman straightened slowly, calm in a way that felt rehearsed. She wore fitted yoga pants and a loose gray sweater, her hair tied back neatly, as if she had already settled into a routine here. Behind her, I saw a stainless steel coffee maker where my old drip machine used to sit, and a ceramic bowl, white with blue trim, filled with lemons I hadn't bought. "I think you might have the wrong house," she added, her tone polite but firm, the way you'd speak to a confused neighbor who wandered too far. I set the grocery bag down on the small entry table, the one with the scratch on the edge from when my grandson dropped a toy truck years ago. The scratch was still there. The table was still mine. Everything else felt shifted. "No," I said, steadying my voice. "I don't think I do." I took a step forward, slow and deliberate, and that's when I noticed my wedding photo was gone from the hallway wall. In its place hung a generic landscape print, something you'd pick up from a clearance aisle at Target. My chest tightened, but I kept my posture straight. "Who are you?" I asked. The woman hesitated just long enough to tell me. She was choosing her words carefully. "We're renting this property," she said. "We signed a lease last week." "We." The word echoed in my head as a man's voice drifted in from the living room. "Everything okay?" He called out, casual, like this was already his domain. He stepped into view, a tall man in his 40s, holding a TV remote, glancing between me and the woman with mild curiosity rather than concern. I looked past him and saw my living room rearranged. My floral armchair had been replaced with a sleek gray sectional. The Afghan I knitted during one long winter was nowhere in sight. "This is my house," I said, more firmly now. "I've lived here for 32 years. The man gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "Ma'am, I don't know what to tell you. We have a signed agreement." The woman reached for a folder on the counter and slid out a sheet of paper, placing it flat as if she had done this before. "Here," she said. "You can look at it." I didn't pick it up right away. Instead, I noticed something else. A mug sat beside her elbow, one of mine, the chipped blue one Arthur used every morning. Except the words on it weren't his anymore. A vinyl label had been added across the side in neat black lettering. "Property of Melissa." My fingers curled slightly at my sides, but I didn't let my voice rise. "Melissa," I repeated quietly. That name landed heavier than anything else in the room. "My daughter-in-law." I finally reached for the paper. The address was correct. The dates were recent. The signature looked like mine at a glance, but something about the curve of the last letter fell off, like someone had practiced it more than once before getting it right. I lifted my eyes slowly. "Where did you get this lease?" I asked. The woman exchanged a quick glance with the man, then answered, from the owner's representative. A pause, just a fraction too long. I held the paper between my fingers, feeling the weight of it settle into something colder than confusion. Because I hadn't been gone that long. 5 days. Just a short visit to a friend in Dayton. 5 days shouldn't have been enough for a life to be replaced. And yet, as I stood there in my own kitchen, staring at a document I never signed and a name I recognized far too well, one thought pressed forward with quiet certainty. This didn't happen by accident. And if Melissa's name was already on my things, then whatever she had started, she believed it was already finished. The paper in my hand felt thin, almost weightless, but the implications behind it pressed down hard enough to steady my breathing. I set it back on the counter instead of clutching it, keeping my movements deliberate. "I would like to see the full agreement," I said, my voice even. The woman hesitated for a fraction of a second before sliding the rest of the documents toward me. That hesitation told me more than anything printed on those pages. I flipped through them slowly, not rushing, letting my eyes catch details instead of reacting to the shock. The lease term was 12 months. Monthly rent listed at $2,100. Utilities not included. My house had never been rented for a single day in its existence. Not even during the years Arthur and I struggled to make mortgage payments. I reached the last page again and studied the signature. Eleanor Whitmore. It looked close enough to pass in a quick glance, but the W in Whitmore curved differently, tighter, like someone copying rather than writing from habit. I lifted my head. Do you have any identification from the person who rented this to you? I asked. The man shifted his weight, glancing toward the woman as if silently asking who should answer. She stepped in smoothly. We worked through a property manager, she said, a woman named Melissa Carter, my daughter-in-law's maiden name. She had not even bothered to use the name she married into. That detail settled something inside me. This was not impulsive. This was arranged. I nodded once, as if confirming a simple fact. Do you happen to have a copy of her contact information? The woman pulled out her phone and scrolled, then read off a number. I did not write it down. I already knew it. I had dialed it hundreds of times over the past 10 years. Instead, I walked past them toward the hallway, ignoring the subtle way the man straightened, as if considering whether to stop me. He did not. That told me they still believed they were on solid ground. My bedroom door was closed. I had left it open when I packed for Dayton. I pushed it gently. The room looked staged. The quilt I had sewn myself was gone, replaced with a neutral beige comforter. The dresser top, once cluttered with framed photos and a small jewelry box, had been cleared except for a single scented candle, labeled Ocean Breeze. I walked to the closet and slid the door open. Half the hangers were empty. The long wool coat I wore every winter was missing. So were the shoeboxes where I kept old tax returns. I crouched down and checked the lower shelf. The metal lockbox Arthur used for important papers was gone entirely. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence of the room settle around me. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and opened the camera. I took pictures. The bed, the dresser, the closet, each shot steady, framed, intentional. When I stepped back into the hallway, the woman was watching me more carefully now. Is everything okay? She asked, though her tone had lost some of its earlier confidence. I'm documenting my property, I replied. You may want to do the same for your belongings. The man frowned slightly. Are we in some kind of trouble here? He asked. I met his eyes. That depends on how quickly we sort out who authorized you to be here. I walked back to the kitchen and picked up the lease again, folding it neatly before setting it down. Then I reached for my phone and tapped Daniel's contact. It rang twice before he answered. Mom? I am in the middle of something. Can this wait? His voice was low, distracted. No, I said. It cannot. I let a brief pause hang there, just long enough for him to hear the difference in my tone. There are people living in my house, Daniel. They have a lease with Melissa's name on it. Silence stretched on the other end. Not confusion, not immediate denial, just silence. And in that silence, I realized something had shifted far beyond a misunderstanding. Because if this had truly been a mistake, my son would have reacted immediately. Instead, when he finally spoke, his voice was careful. Mom, maybe you should not jump to conclusions. I looked around my kitchen, at the unfamiliar appliances, at the label on my own mug, at the strangers waiting for answers I already suspected. Then help me understand, I said quietly. Because right now, it looks like someone planned this while I was gone. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Daniel exhaled slowly. I think we need to talk about your living situation. The words landed heavier than anything else I had heard that afternoon. Not your house, not your property, your living situation. I ended the call without responding. When I looked up, both strangers were watching me, waiting for direction I was not ready to give them yet. But one thing was clear now. This was not just about a forged signature or a lease. This had been set in motion before I ever packed my suitcase. And the only question left was how long my son had known about it. I did not speak again right away. Instead, I slipped my phone back into my purse and looked at the two people standing in my kitchen, measuring something that had shifted quietly but completely. A few hours ago, I would have asked them to leave. Now I understood that asking would not be enough. I'm going to step out for a bit, I said, calm and clear. You may want to keep your documents nearby. The woman nodded, uncertain now, while the man gave a small shrug, as if this had suddenly become more complicated than they expected. I picked up my car keys from the same ceramic bowl. I had placed them in years ago, though someone had moved it closer to the wall. That detail stayed with me as I walked out. Small changes. Intentional ones. Outside, the late afternoon sun sat low over Maple Grove Lane, casting long shadows across the driveways. My neighbor's mailbox still leaned slightly to the left, just like it always had. The world had not changed. Only what was mine had. I got into my car, a 10-year-old Honda Accord Arthur insisted we keep as long as it runs, and closed the door slowly. For a moment, I rested my hands on the steering wheel without turning the engine on. Then I started the car and drove straight to First Community Bank, the same branch on Broad Street where Arthur and I had opened our joint account decades ago. Inside, the air conditioning hummed steadily, and the faint scent of carpet cleaner lingered. The teller at the counter, a young man with a neatly pressed shirt and a name tag that read Evan, smiled politely. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" he asked. "I need to review recent activity on my account," I said. "Specifically anything from the past 2 weeks." He nodded and typed quickly, his expression neutral until it changed just slightly as he scanned the screen. "Would you like a printed statement?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Everything." He handed me several pages a moment later, the paper still warm from the printer. I stepped aside to one of the small writing desks near the wall and began reading line by line. It did not take long. There it was. A withdrawal I had not authorized. $38,500. A cashier's check issued 4 days ago. Memo line, renovation prep. My fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the paper, but I did not let my breathing change. Renovation. That explained the laminate flooring. The new appliances. The speed of it all. I walked back to the counter. "Who requested this check?" I asked. Evan glanced at the screen again. "It was processed in person," he said. "Authorized on a joint account holder's signature." "Joint account." "Daniel." "Of course. Do you have a copy of the signed request?" I asked. He hesitated. "I can request it from records," he said carefully. "It may take a day or two." "Please do," I replied. "And I would also like to place a temporary hold on any further withdrawals above $500. His eyebrows lifted slightly, but he nodded. "I can set that up right now." As he worked, I looked down again at the statement, letting the numbers settle into something solid and undeniable. This was not just about access to my home anymore. This was coordinated. Money moved. Property altered. Documents filed. I folded the papers neatly and placed them in my purse. When I stepped back outside, the air felt cooler, or maybe it was just clearer now. I got back into my car, but instead of heading home, I pulled over to the side of the street and opened my phone. I scrolled to Melissa's contact, stared at it for a moment, then pressed call. It rang longer than I expected. When she finally answered, her voice was composed, almost pleasant. "Eleanor, I was just about to reach out to you," she said. "We need to have a conversation." I let a brief silence pass, then said, "I'm looking at my bank statement right now. $38,500. Renovation prep." Another pause. Shorter this time. Calculated. "We were trying to make things easier for you," she replied. "That house is too much for you to manage on your own." I leaned back in my seat, watching a delivery truck roll past slowly down the street. "You had no authority to move my money," I said, "or my belongings." Her tone did not change. "Daniel is on the account," she said, "and we have been discussing your situation for months." Months. The words settled in a different place than the others. Not days. Not a sudden decision. Something longer. Something deliberate. I ended the call without another word. For a moment, I sat there, listening to the faint ticking of the engine cooling beneath the hood. Then I opened my purse again, took out the bank statement, and looked at the date of the withdrawal one more time. 4 days ago, the same week I left for Dayton, the same week strangers moved into my home. And for the first time since I walked through my front door, I asked myself a different question. Not how this happened, but when it really began, because if Melissa had been planning this for months, then there had to be earlier signs I had missed, and I suddenly needed to know exactly how far back this betrayal actually went. I did not drive home right away. Instead, I turned on a Maple Grove and parked halfway down the street, just far enough that I could see my house without being seen easily from the front windows. The late afternoon light had shifted, casting a warm glow across the siding, the same pale blue Arthur had insisted on repainting 5 summers ago. From a distance, everything looked exactly the way it should. That was the unsettling part. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded bank statement again, smoothing it across the steering wheel, then set it aside and picked up my phone. This time, I did not call anyone. I opened my email instead. There, buried under store promotions and newsletters I rarely read, was something I had overlooked before. Subject line, document completed, signature confirmation. The sender was a digital signing service I did not remember ever using. My thumb hovered for a second before I opened it. The message was dated 5 days ago, the morning after I left for Dayton. Attached was a PDF. I downloaded it and opened it slowly, my eyes scanning the top line first. Property transfer, authorization, my address, my name, and below it, a digital signature time-stamped at 10:02 a.m. I knew exactly where I had been at that time, sitting in my friend Carol's kitchen, drinking coffee out of a chipped red mug while we talked about her garden. I had not signed anything, not physically, not digitally. I zoomed in on the document, studying the details. The email address used for the signature was not mine. It was close, just one letter off, the kind of change that would slip past a quick glance. But it was enough. Enough to create a separate account. Enough to complete a transaction without my knowledge. I exhaled slowly and leaned back in my seat, the pieces beginning to align in a way that felt less like confusion and more like structure. This had layers. The lease, the bank withdrawal, the transfer document, all within the same narrow window of time. I opened the message details and found something else. An IP address logged at the moment of signing. I did not recognize the numbers, but I did recognize the location listed beneath it. Columbus, Ohio. Not Dayton. Not anywhere near Carol's house. I closed the file and sat there for a moment, letting the quiet of the car settle around me. Then I started the engine and drove 2 blocks over to a small strip of shops where I knew I would find someone who might recognize that kind of detail. A place called Tech Fix Solutions sat between a dry cleaner and a sandwich shop. The bell above the door chimed softly as I stepped inside. A young man behind the counter looked up from a laptop. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I hope so," I said, walking over and placing my phone on the counter. "I need to understand where this came from." I showed him the email, the IP address, the timestamp. He leaned in, studying the screen, then nodded slowly. "This just tells you the general location," he said. "But if it says Columbus, it was signed somewhere local. Could be a home network, could be public Wi-Fi. Could it be done from inside my house?" I asked. He glanced up at me, then back at the phone. "Yeah," he said. "If someone had access to a device there, or even just the internet connection." I thanked him and stepped back outside. The air cooler now as evening settled in. Inside my house. Using my address. Using a version of my email. That was not just planning. That was proximity. I got back into my car and drove the remaining distance home, pulling into the driveway this time without hesitation. As I stepped out, I noticed something I had missed earlier. A small white sticker near the edge of the garage door frame. Faded, but still readable. Midwest Relocation, LLC. The same name Mr. Collins had mentioned years ago when he moved across the street. I walked closer and ran my fingers lightly over it. Not new. Not placed today. Something that had been there long enough to blend into the background. Like everything else I had overlooked. I straightened and looked toward the front door, where the faint glow of the kitchen light spilled onto the porch. If the documents had been signed here, if the money had been moved with Daniel's access, and if Melissa had coordinated the lease under her maiden name, then this was no longer a question of whether they had done it. It was a question of how they had managed to do all of it without me seeing a single step along the way. And as I reached for the doorknob again, one thought settled firmly in place, sharper than the rest. If this plan had required access to my house, my accounts, and my identity at the same time, then someone had to have been inside long before I ever left for Dayton. I stepped back into the house without knocking, the decision already made before my hand touched the handle. The moment I crossed the threshold, I could feel it again, that subtle shift in ownership, like I had entered a place that remembered me, but no longer answered to me. The man was in the living room, sitting on the new gray sectional, a laptop open on his knees. He looked up, surprised but not alarmed. "Hey," he said, as if we were neighbors running into each other. "Everything sorted out?" "Not yet," I replied, setting my purse down deliberately on the kitchen counter, exactly where it used to belong. The woman emerged from the hallway, her expression tighter now. "We were actually about to call the property manager," she said. "This is starting to feel complicated." "It is complicated," I said, meeting her gaze. "And it is about to get more so." I reached into my purse and pulled out the printed bank statement, placing it flat on the counter between us. $38,500 withdrawn 4 days ago, I said. "From my account. Used for what you are standing in right now." The man leaned forward slightly, glancing at the paper. "We paid first month and deposit," he said. "That is all we know." His tone had shifted. Less confident, more cautious. "How did you pay?" I asked. "Cashier's check," he answered. "From Midwest Credit Union." That detail landed quickly. "Not my bank. A separate institution." I nodded once, filing it away. "And who handed it to you?" The woman hesitated again, then said, "Melissa." There was no title this time. "No, Ms. Carter. Just Melissa. Familiar. Direct." I took a slow breath, then turned and walked toward the hallway again, this time with purpose. "I'm going to check the rest of the house," I said over my shoulder. "You are welcome to stay where you are." Neither of them followed. That, too, told me something. In the guest room, I noticed another change. The filing cabinet I kept near the window had been replaced with a smaller, newer unit. I opened it. Inside were neatly arranged folders, each labeled in clean, printed tabs. Utilities, insurance, lease agreement. I pulled the last one out and opened it. Inside was a second copy of the lease, along with a receipt for the cashier's check. Amount, $4,200. First month and security deposit. Issued to Melissa Carter. I stared at the receipt for a moment, then flipped to the back. There, faint but visible, was a stamp date and branch location. Midwest Credit Union, Easton Branch. I closed the folder and slid it back into place, then returned to the kitchen. The woman was standing now, arms loosely crossed, her posture more guarded. "We did everything by the book," she said. "We are not trying to cause trouble." "I believe you," I replied, "but you may have stepped into someone else's." I reached for my phone and, without hesitation this time, dialed Daniel again. He answered on the first ring. "Mom, I told you, I am in a meeting, then step out," I said. My voice did not rise, but it did not leave room for negotiation. A brief pause, then the sound of a door closing on his end. "Okay," he said. "What is going on?" I glanced at the two strangers in front of me, then at the unfamiliar coffee maker, the labeled mug, the replaced furniture. "I have the lease," I said. "I have the bank withdrawal, and I have a receipt made out to Melissa for $4,200 from a credit union we do not use." Silence again, but this time it felt different. Tighter. "Mom," he said slowly, "you are making this bigger than it needs to be." I let that sit for a moment, then answered, "Someone signed a property transfer in my name from inside this house while I was in Dayton." Another pause. Longer. "Daniel," I continued, my voice steady, "I need you to tell me exactly when you first knew about this." On the other end of the line, I heard him exhale, the sound controlled but unmistakably strained. "We were trying to help you," he said finally. "This house, it is not practical anymore." I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them again, focusing on the details in front of me, not the words. "That is not what I asked," I said. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier, as if everything was pressing toward a single point. Daniel did not answer right away, and in that silence, standing in a kitchen that no longer reflected my life, I understood something that raised the stakes far beyond what I had already uncovered. Because if he could not answer a simple question about when this started, then it meant there was a part of this plan he was still trying to protect. And whatever that part was, it was likely the one that mattered most. Daniel did not answer my question, and that silence told me more than anything he could have said out loud. I ended the call without waiting for him to recover, then slipped my phone back into my purse with the same steady motion I had used all afternoon. Across the counter, the woman shifted her weight, her arms no longer crossed but hanging loosely at her sides. "Are we going to need to leave?" she asked, her voice quieter now, less certain. I looked at her for a moment, then shook my head once. "Not today," I said. "You signed. Something you believed was legitimate. That is not your fault." The man exhaled slowly, relief flickering across his face, but it did not last long. "Then what happens now?" he asked. I picked up the lease again, folding it neatly before placing it back on the counter. "Now," I said, "we let things unfold exactly as they were planned." That seemed to confuse them, and I did not explain further. Instead, I turned and walked toward the back door, stepping out into the yard where the grass had been trimmed shorter than I would have liked. Another small change. Another decision made without me. I moved to the side of the house where the old utility meter sat, mounted just below the kitchen window. Arthur used to check it every month, writing the numbers down in a small spiral notebook he kept in the garage. I had continued the habit after he passed, not because I needed to, but because it kept things consistent. The meter cover was slightly ajar. Not broken, just not secured the way it should have been. I crouched down and examined it more closely. Inside, I could see the digital display, steady and unchanged, but there was something else. A small sticker tucked along the inner edge, nearly invisible unless you knew to look. Midwest Relocation, LLC. The same company name. Again, this time placed where no one would notice unless they were paying attention. I straightened slowly, brushing my hands together, and looked back toward the house. If they had been inside before I left, if they had access to the utilities, the network, the physical layout, then this had not started with paperwork. It had started with access, and access meant trust. I walked back inside, my steps measured, and returned to the kitchen where the two tenants were now speaking quietly to each other. They stopped when I entered. "I'm going to need a copy of everything you have," I said. "Lease, receipts, any emails or messages with Melissa." The woman nodded quickly. "We can forward it to you," she said. "Just tell me where." I reached for a pen from the drawer, one of the few things that had not been replaced, and wrote down a new email address on the back of a grocery receipt. Not my usual one. Not the one that had been altered for the digital signature. "Send it here," I said, sliding the paper toward her. She glanced at it, then looked back up. "Is there anything else we should do?" I paused, considering that question carefully. Then I said, "Yes. Do not change anything else in this house. Not a single item. Leave everything exactly as it is." The man frowned slightly. "Why?" I met his eyes. "Because right now," I said, "this house is evidence." That word shifted the room. Evidence. It reframed everything from inconvenience to consequence. The woman swallowed and nodded. "Okay," she said. "We understand." I picked up my purse again and walked toward the front door, but before I left, I turned back once more. "And if Melissa contacts you," I added, "do not tell her I have been here." The man blinked. "You want us to keep that from her?" "For now," I said. "Yes." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, the soft click of the latch echoing more sharply than it should have. As I walked back to my car, I could feel something settling into place, not resolution, but direction. This was no longer about reacting to what had been done. It was about understanding how it had been done well enough to stop it from continuing. I got into the driver's seat and pulled out my phone again, scrolling past Daniel's name this time, past Melissa's, until I found a contact I had not used in years. Martin Halle, the attorney who had handled Arthur's estate. My finger hovered over the name for a moment, then pressed call. The line rang once, twice, before a familiar voice answered. "Martin Hale," he said. "This is Eleanor Whitmore," I replied. "I believe I am going to need your help." There was a brief pause, then a shift in his tone, sharper, attentive. "Eleanor," he said, "what seems to be the problem?" I looked back at the house one more time, at the drawn curtains, the unfamiliar shapes moving faintly behind them, and said, "I think someone has been preparing to take my home for months." Another pause, longer this time. Then Martin spoke again, more carefully. "Do you have documentation?" I glanced down at my purse, at the folded statement, the photos on my phone, the email I had just uncovered. "I have enough to start," I said. "Good," he replied. "Then do not confront anyone. Else until we review everything." And Eleanor, if this was done intentionally, there will be more than one document involved. I ended the call slowly, letting his words settle in alongside everything else. More than one document. That meant more signatures, more access, more points where this plan could have been built piece by piece without me noticing. I started the car again, but this time I did not hesitate. Because now, for the first time since I opened my front door, I was no longer trying to understand what had happened. I was preparing to prove it. And if Martin was right, then somewhere in all of this, there had to be a document they never expected me to find. I did not go home that night. Instead, I drove straight to Martin Hale's office the next morning, arriving 10 minutes before he opened. The parking lot was still mostly empty, the early sun reflecting off the glass windows of the low brick building. I sat in my car for a moment, reviewing everything again, not the emotions but the facts. The lease, the bank withdrawal, the digital signature, the relocation company. Each piece lined up too cleanly to be accidental. When the office lights flicked on inside, I stepped out and walked in. Martin greeted me with a firm handshake and a look that had already shifted into professional focus. "Let us take a look," he said, gesturing toward a chair across his desk. I handed him my phone first, opening the email with the property transfer, then the bank statement, then the photos I had taken of the house. He did not interrupt as he reviewed each item, only nodding occasionally, his expression tightening in small, precise ways. Finally, he leaned back slightly. "This is coordinated," he said, "and it is recent, which works in your favor." I folded my hands in my lap. "They use my name," I said. "And my account." "Yes," he replied, "but they also made a mistake." That word caught my attention immediately. "What kind of mistake?" I asked. Martin turned his monitor slightly, so I could see the screen. "They moved too quickly," he said, "and they left a trail." He clicked into a database and began typing. "Property transfers like this are recorded at the county level. Let us see what was filed." The screen refreshed, and a document appeared. "Franklin, County Recorder's Office. My address. Filed 3 days ago." I leaned forward slightly. "That is the one I saw," I said. "The forged signature." Martin nodded. "Yes, but this is not the only filing." He clicked again, opening a second document. This one was dated 6 weeks earlier. My breath slowed as I read the title. Limited Power of Attorney. My name listed as the grantor. Daniel Whitmore listed as the agent. I felt something shift, not sharply, but deeply. "I never signed that," I said. My voice remained steady, but the weight behind it had changed. Martin glanced at me briefly, then back at the screen. "It appears you did," he said carefully. "Or at least, something was submitted with your signature." I leaned closer, studying the document. The signature looked more natural than the one on the transfer. Less forced, less practiced. And that was what unsettled me most. Because it meant whoever created it had taken more time, or had something real to work from. "What does this give him?" I asked. Martin pointed to a section midway down the page. "Authority to manage financial matters related to property," he said, "including transactions, maintenance, and leasing." Leasing. The word landed cleanly. "So he did not need to forge everything," I said slowly. "Just enough to extend what he already had." Martin nodded. "Exactly." I sat back, letting that settle into place. This had not started with the week I was gone. It had started at least 6 weeks earlier. Possibly longer. "Can this be reversed?" I asked. Martin's expression remained measured. "If it was obtained under false pretenses, yes," he said. "But we will need to prove that." He clicked again, scrolling through the document details. "And there's something else." I leaned forward slightly. "What?" He turned the screen again. At the bottom of the filing was a notary stamp. Name, license number, location, Easton Branch, the same area listed on the cashier's check receipt. "That connects your financial withdrawal to the legal authority they claimed," Martin said. "Same geographic point, same time frame." I nodded once, feeling the structure of it become clearer. Not just actions, but sequence. Access to authority, then money, then property. "What do we do next?" I asked. Martin closed the file and looked at me directly. "We do not confront them yet," he said. "We gather everything. Every document, every transaction, every communication. And then we file for an injunction before they can finalize anything further." Finalize. The word caught my attention. What do you mean, finalize? I asked. Martin hesitated briefly, then said, if they intended to transfer ownership once, they may intend to do it again. More permanently. I felt the shift fully then, not as shock, but as clarity. This was not about renting out my house. It was about removing me from it entirely. I stood slowly, collecting my phone and papers. Then we do not wait, I said. Martin gave a small nod. Agreed. As I walked out of his office, the morning had fully settled in, traffic building along the main road, people moving through their routines as if nothing had changed. But something had, because now I knew this was not just Melissa's plan. It was built on something Daniel had already signed weeks before I ever left town. And as I reached my car, one question moved to the front of everything else, sharper than the rest. If my son had legal authority over my property before I even realized it, then what else had he already put into motion that I had not yet uncovered? I did not go back to the house immediately after leaving Martin's office. Instead, I drove a few blocks past Maple Grove and parked again where I could see the front yard without being obvious. This time, there was a different car in the driveway. A black SUV I recognized instantly. Melissa's. She had not wasted time. I watched as she stepped out, sunglasses still on despite the fading light, moving with the same controlled efficiency I had seen at family dinners when she decided how things would go. She did not hesitate at the door. She used a key. That detail settled something firmly in place. She had access long before any lease was signed. I stayed in the car, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, and observed. A few minutes later, Daniel arrived. He parked behind her, got out more slowly, his shoulders slightly hunched, his phone still in his hand. He glanced around once, almost out of habit, then went inside without knocking. No surprise, no confusión, just continuation. I reached for my phone and opened the camera, zooming in just enough to capture the movement without drawing attention. Not for proof of emotion, for sequence, for timing, for presence. 10 minutes passed. Then the front door opened again. Melissa stepped out first, holding a folder. Daniel followed, carrying a small box. Not large, not furniture. Something contained, something deliberate. They stood near the car, speaking in low tones, but the distance carried just enough for fragments to reach me when the wind shifted. We cannot wait much longer, Melissa said, her voice steady. Daniel replied, quieter, what if she pushes back? Melissa gave a small, dismissive motion with her hand. She will not, she said. Everything is already in place. I did not move. I did not react. I simply watched as she opened the SUV and placed the folder inside, then took the box from Daniel and set it beside it. He hesitated for a moment, his hand lingering on the edge of the door. Are you sure this is necessary? He asked. Melissa turned to him fully, then, her posture straight, her tone calm but firm. If we do not finalize this now, it becomes harder later, she said. You know that. Finalize. The same word Martin had used. The same direction. The same timeline. Daniel nodded slowly, though there was something in his expression that had not been there before. Not doubt exactly. More like strain. He closed the car door, and they both got in. I lowered my phone slightly, keeping them in view as the engine started and the SUV pulled away from the curb. I waited until they turned the corner before I stepped out of my car. The air felt cooler now, the quiet of the street settling in again as if nothing had just shifted. But it had, because now I had seen it. Not just the results, the process. I walked up the driveway and paused at the front door, noticing something new. A small keypad had been installed just beside the frame. It had not been there before. The kind you could program with multiple access codes. I ran my fingers lightly over it, then stepped inside. The tenants were in the living room, both looking up as I entered. They were just here, the woman said quickly. Melissa said everything was moving forward as planned. I nodded once. Did she say what exactly is being finalized? I asked. The man shook his head. Just that paperwork was being completed, he said. She mentioned something about a closing date. Closing. Not leasing. Not managing. Closing. I took a slow breath and moved into the kitchen, my eyes scanning the space again, but this time not for what had changed, for what had been added. On the counter, near the new coffee maker, sat a small stack of envelopes. I picked them up. One was addressed to Daniel Whitmore, another to Melissa Carter, and one, thin, official-looking, bore the return address of a title company in Columbus. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of it, the precision of what it represented. Not preparation, completion. I looked up slowly, meeting the tenant's eyes again. "If anyone asks," I said, my voice steady, "you have not seen me today." They nodded, both of them now fully aware that they were standing inside something much larger than a rental agreement. I set the envelope back down exactly where I found it, then stepped away from the counter, because now I knew the next move was already scheduled. And whatever Melissa and Daniel had just taken with them in that car, it was not the beginning of their plan. It was the final step, which meant if I want to stop this, I was no longer trying to catch up. I was trying to intercept something that was already in motion, and I needed to find out exactly where they were going before it was too late. I did not touch the envelope again after setting it back on the counter. Instead, I stepped away from it, letting it sit exactly where Melissa had left it, as if nothing had shifted at all. That was the first decision, not to interrupt the pattern. Not yet. I turned to the tenants and gave a small, measured nod. "Go about your evening," I said. "Do not change anything." The woman hesitated, then asked, "Are you coming back later?" I held her gaze for a moment, then answered, "Yes," just not in the way they expect. That seemed to settle something for her, though she did not fully understand it. She did not need to. I stepped outside again, closing the door softly behind me, and walked back down the driveway without looking back. Once inside my car, I did not start the engine right away. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded bank statement, the photos, and my phone. I opened a new note and began organizing everything, not emotionally but chronologically. 6 weeks ago, power of attorney filed. 4 days ago, funds withdrawn. 3 days ago, property transfer submitted. Today, title company correspondence and closing mentioned. The structure of it became clearer the moment I laid it out in sequence. This was not scattered. It was scheduled. I tapped the screen again and added one more line. Tonight or tomorrow, finalization. That word had come up twice now, from 2 different places. That was not coincidence. That was timing. I started the car and drove straight back to Martin's office. The lights were still on, though it was nearing early evening. He looked up as I entered, surprised but attentive. "Something new?" he asked. I placed the timeline I had written on his desk, along with the photo of the title company envelope. "They are moving forward faster than we thought," I said. He studied the paper, then leaned back slightly. "A closing would require all parties or valid representation," he said. "If your son is acting under that power of attorney, he could attempt it." "Attempt," I repeated. "Not complete." Martin gave a small, precise shake of his head. "Not if we intervene correctly," he said. "But timing matters. If they file and record before we act, it becomes more complicated." I nodded once, feeling the weight of that window. "Then we do not wait," I said. He reached for his phone and made a quick call, speaking in low, efficient tones I did not need to interrupt. When he hung up, he looked at me again. "There is a preliminary filing scheduled tomorrow morning," he said. "Same title company you photographed. Easton Branch. Tomorrow morning." That aligned perfectly. I let that settle, then asked, "What do you need from me?" Martin leaned forward slightly. "I need you to let them believe everything is proceeding as planned," he said. "No confrontation. No warnings. If they think you are aware, they will adjust." I held his gaze. "They already believe I am unaware," I said. "Good," he replied. "Then we use that." I gathered my papers again, folding them carefully before placing them back into my purse. As I stood, Martin added one more thing. "Eleanor," he said, his tone quieter now, "once we move, it will be direct. There will not be another opportunity to do this quietly." I nodded. "I understand." When I stepped back outside, the evening air had cooled further, the street lights beginning to flicker on one by one. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, not thinking about what had been taken, but about what was about to happen next. Then I reached for my phone and scrolled to Daniel's name. I let it ring just long enough to feel natural before he answered. "Mom," he said, cautious now. "I have been thinking. I said, keeping my tone even, almost reflective. Maybe you and Melissa are right. This house is a lot for me. There was a pause, then a subtle shift in his voice. Relief. I'm glad you see that, he said. We were trying to help. I know, I replied. And I do not want to make things harder. If there is paperwork that needs to be finished, I am willing to cooperate. Another pause, shorter this time. That would make everything much easier, he said. We can take care of it tomorrow. Tomorrow. Confirmed. I let a small breath out, just enough to sound like acceptance. Tell me where, I said. He gave me the address. Easton, the same location. When I ended the call, I placed the phone down carefully and looked straight ahead through the windshield, the reflection of the streetlights stretching across the glass. They believed I was stepping into their plan. They believed I was finally agreeing. And for the first time since this began, I was no longer trying to catch up to what they had done. I knew exactly where they would be, exactly when they would act, and exactly what they thought I would do next. The only thing they did not know was that by tomorrow morning, I would already be there before them. I arrived at the Easton Title office 40 minutes before they opened. The parking lot was still mostly empty, the morning air carrying that quiet stillness that comes before a business day begins. I chose a spot near the side of the building, not directly in front, and turned off the engine. For a moment, I simply sat there, hands resting lightly on my purse, feeling the weight of everything I had gathered inside it. Not fear, not hesitation, just precision. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance as the first employee unlocked the door. A woman in her 50s, neatly dressed, glanced at me with polite surprise. We are not open yet, she said. Understand, I replied, but I believe I need to speak with someone before a scheduled closing this morning. She paused, assessing me briefly, then opened the door wider. You can come in, she said. Inside, the office was quiet, the lights still warming up, the faint hum of printers beginning to fill the space. I was directed to a small conference room with a long table and a stack of neatly arranged folders at one end. I recognized the layout immediately. Prepared, organized, waiting for signatures. I set my purse down on the table and remained standing, scanning the room carefully. On the far end of the table sat a nameplate, Whitmore Property Transfer. The words were printed cleanly, professionally, as if this had already been decided. I reached out and adjusted the folder slightly, just enough to see the edge of the top document without fully opening it. A closing statement. Purchase price listed. Buyer name redacted beneath a tab. My house reduced to a transaction. The door opened behind me, and a man in a dark suit stepped in, carrying a tablet. Good morning, he said. Are you here for the Whitmore closing? I turned to face him. Yes, I said. I am. He gave a small, professional nod. Great, he replied. We are expecting the other parties shortly. We will begin as soon as everyone arrives. Other parties. I'll let that phrase settle. Not just Daniel. Not just Melissa. There was someone else involved. Someone prepared to take ownership. I pulled out my phone and sent a brief message to Martin. I am inside. Everything is prepared. His response came almost immediately. Do not sign anything. We are filing now. I slipped the phone back into my purse just as the front door opened again. Voices carried down the hallway, familiar ones. Melissa entered first, her posture composed, her expression already set in that calm, controlled confidence I'd seen the day before. Daniel followed, his steps slower, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. He stopped. For just a second, the balance shifted. Mom, he said, the word catching slightly. Melissa did not stop. She walked forward, setting her folder on the table. With measured precision. I did not expect you this early, she said, her tone smooth. I thought we agreed to meet here together. I met her gaze steadily. I prefer to be on time, I replied. The man in the suit glanced between us, sensing something beneath the surface but not yet understanding it. If everyone is here, he said carefully, we can begin reviewing the documents. Melissa gave a small nod. Yes, let us do that, she said, sliding her folder open. Daniel remained where he was for a moment longer, then moved slowly to the table, his hand brushing the back of a chair before he sat down. I stayed standing. That was the next decision. Not to sit, not to settle into their arrangement. The man began speaking, outlining the process, his voice steady and procedural. We will go through each document, confirm identities, and then proceed with signatures. His words continued, but I was no longer focused on the explanation. I was watching Melissa, watching the way her fingers rested lightly on the edge of the paper, the way she glanced once toward Daniel, then back to the documents. Confident, certain, as if the outcome was already secured. And that was when I saw it. A small detail, nearly invisible unless you knew what to look for. On the corner of her top document, just beneath the header, was the same notary stamp I had seen the day before. Easton Branch. Same license number. Same hand that had validated the power of attorney. This was not just a closing. It was the final step in a chain that had been building for weeks. I reached into my purse slowly, my fingers brushing against the folded documents Martin had prepared, the ones that had been filed just minutes ago. The man in the suit looked up. "Ma'am," he said, "we will need your identification before we proceed." I met his eyes, then glanced briefly at Melissa and Daniel before answering. "Of course," I said. My voice was calm, but the room had already shifted, even if they did not fully realize it yet. Because they believed this was the moment everything would be finalized. They believed I was here to sign. What they did not know was that the documents I was about to place on this table were not part of their plan. And in just a few seconds, the version of this morning they had carefully constructed was about to come apart in front of them. "Before we begin," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the room, "there is something that needs to be addressed first." The man in the suit paused mid-sentence, his tablet still in his hands, while Melissa's fingers stilled on the edge of her documents. Daniel looked up at me fully now, the uncertainty in his expression no longer hidden. I reached in my purse and placed a new set of papers on the table, sliding them forward with deliberate precision. "This was filed with the county less than 30 minutes ago," I continued. "An emergency injunction and notice of fraudulent conveyance regarding this property." The man stepped closer, his professional composure tightening as he picked up the top page. His eyes moved quickly across the text, then slowed, reading more carefully. "This changes things," he said quietly. Melissa's head turned sharply toward him. "What does that mean?" she asked, her tone controlled but edged now with something sharper. He did not answer her immediately. Instead, he flipped to the second page, then the third, scanning the attached documentation. "It means," he said finally, "that we cannot proceed with this closing until the matter is resolved." The room shifted in a way that could not be undone. Melissa straightened, her posture tightening. "There must be some mistake," she said. "We have all the proper documents." "Do you?" I asked, meeting her gaze. I reached forward and tapped lightly on the corner of her folder. "Because I have copies of the power of attorney filed 6 weeks ago, the bank withdrawal authorized under that document, and the digital signature used to transfer ownership, all connected to the same notary, the same location, and the same timeline." Daniel's eyes moved between us, his breathing shallow now. "Mom," he said, his voice lower, "this does not have to turn into something bigger than it is." I turned him fully. "It already has," I said. "You signed a document granting yourself authority over my property without my knowledge. Then that authority was used to move my money, lease my home, and attempt to transfer ownership." The man in the suit cleared his throat slightly, still holding the injunction. "There is also a note here," he said, looking down again. "The filing includes a request to investigate potential identity fraud and misrepresentation." Melissa's composure slipped for the first time, just slightly. "That is an accusation," she said, "not a conclusion." I nodded once. "Correct," I said, "which is why we are here." I reached into my purse again and pulled out my phone, placing it on the table and opening the email with the digital signature. "This was executed while I was in Dayton," I said, "from an email address that is not mine, using a network located in Columbus." I tapped the screen again, bringing up the bank statement. "And this withdrawal," I continued, "was processed in person under a joint account within hours of that document being completed." The man set the injunction down slowly, his attention now fully on the materials in front of him. "I will need to report this to our compliance department," he said, "and we will need to verify all parties involved before proceeding further." There will be no proceeding today, I replied calmly. Melissa's eyes locked onto mine, her voice quieter now, but far more direct. You think this stops everything? She asked. I held her gaze without hesitation. No, I said. I think this starts something else. Daniel shifted in his seat, his hands now clasped together, his earlier certainty gone. We were trying to help, he said again, but the words no longer carried weight. I did not respond to that. Instead, I turned slightly toward the man in the suit. You will also find, I said, that the notary listed on those documents is connected to both the power of attorney and the transfer attempt, which may raise additional concerns about how those signatures were verified. The man nodded slowly, his expression now fully serious. Yes, he said, it does. The balance in the room had shifted completely. What had been a scheduled closing was now a halted transaction, suspended under formal review. Melissa's plan, precise and controlled until this moment, had been interrupted at its final step. But I did not move to leave. Not yet, because there was one more piece I needed to see fall into place. I looked at Daniel again, this time not with accusation, but with clarity. There is still time to explain how this began, I said, before someone else starts asking those questions. He did not answer right away. And in that silence, as the man began making calls and the documents remained untouched on the table, I realized something that shifted the situation even further. Because this was no longer just about stopping the transfer. It was about uncovering who else had been involved in making it possible. And Daniel's hesitation suggested there was still a part of this plan I had not yet seen. The room did not stay quiet after that. It broke, not all at once, but in sharp, uneven pieces. This is ridiculous, Melissa said, her voice rising for the first time, the control she had carried into the room slipping just enough to show what was underneath. You are turning a family decision into a legal circus. I felt something surge up in me then, not controlled, not measured, but real and immediate. A family decision? I stepped closer to the table, my hand pressing flat against the document she had brought. You call forging my name, moving my money, and trying to sell my house a family decision? My voice was louder now, steady but no longer restrained. The man in the suit stepped back slightly, clearly recognizing that this had moved beyond a standard dispute. Daniel stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Mom, listen, he said, his tone strained. We were trying to make this easier for you. That house is too much. You know it is. I turned toward him, the frustration that had been building now impossible to hold back. Do not tell me what I know, I said sharply. You went behind my back. You signed documents I never agreed to. You let her. I gestured toward Melissa, my hand cutting through the air. You let her take control of everything I built. Daniel flinched slightly, but he did not step away. I had authority, he said, his voice tightening. You gave it to me. No, I shot back immediately. Something was filed with my name on it. That is not the same thing. The tension in the room thickened, the kind that presses against your chest and makes every word feel heavier. Melissa stepped forward then, her composure snapping into something sharper, more aggressive. You are overreacting, she said. Everything we did was practical. The house was going to be sold eventually anyway. We just moved the process forward. I stared at her, the calm certainty in her voice only fueling the anger. Rising in me. You do not get to decide that for me, I said. You do not get to rewrite my life because it is more convenient for you. The man in the suit cleared his throat again, louder this time. I'm going to have to ask everyone to lower their voices, he said, though his own voice carried a note of urgency now. This situation is being escalated to compliance, and we will need to document everything that has been presented here today. Good, I said without hesitation, my eyes still locked on Melissa. Document all of it. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing a step away from the table before turning back. You are making this worse, he said. We could have handled this quietly. Quietly, I repeated, disbelief cutting through my words. You already handled it quietly. That is the problem. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence that followed was not empty. It was charged, heavy with everything that had just been said and everything that could not be taken back. Melissa's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing slightly as she looked at me. "You think this ends here?" she asked, her tone low now, controlled again but colder. I met her gaze without stepping back. "No," I said. "I think this is where it finally becomes visible." The man in the suit stepped forward again, gathering the documents into a neat stack. "This closing is officially suspended," he said. "No further action will be taken until this matter is resolved through legal review." That was it. The moment their plan stopped moving forward. Not delayed. Stopped. Daniel exhaled slowly, the weight of it settling across his face. Melissa did not move. She stood there, still, her expression unreadable now, calculating something behind her eyes. I reached for my purse, my hands no longer trembling, but not still either. This was not calm. This was something else. Something that had finally crossed from disbelief into action. As I turned toward the door, I paused just long enough to look back at Daniel. "You had weeks to tell me the truth," I said. "Now you're going to have to explain it to someone else." I stepped out into the hallway, the door closing behind me with a soft but final sound. And as I walked toward the exit, I realized something that made my steps slow just slightly. Because this was not over. Not even close. The documents had stopped the sale, but they had also triggered something else. An investigation that would start asking questions neither of them seemed ready to answer. And if what Martin said was true, then the next time we sat across from each other, it would not be in a conference room. It would be somewhere far more serious, where the truth would not just be argued, but proven. 3 days later, I stood on my front porch again, but this time the air felt different. Clearer. The small keypad by the door had already been removed, the screws still visible where it had been installed without my knowledge. A locksmith truck was parked at the curb, the back doors open, tools neatly arranged. Inside, I could hear the sound of metal clicking into place as the new locks were fitted. I stepped inside slowly, taking in a space that had once felt unfamiliar. The gray sectional was gone. The stainless steel coffee maker had been boxed up and placed by the door. My floral armchair was back where it belonged, returned from a storage unit Martin's office had located through the transaction records. Even the Afghan I had knitted years ago was folded neatly over the armrest, as if it had been waiting for me. "All set, ma'am," the locksmith said as he walked out of the hallway, wiping his hands on a cloth. "New deadbolt, new keypad, and only 2 keys issued. No one else has access." I nodded once, taking the keys from his hand. "Thank you," I said. "That is exactly what I needed." He gave a polite smile and headed out, leaving the door open behind him. Outside, a second vehicle had just pulled up, not a familiar one, a county enforcement sedan. 2 individuals stepped out, both carrying folders, both moving with the kind of purpose that did not require explanation. I did not step outside to greet them. I did not need to. I simply stood in the entryway and watched through the open door as they walked up the driveway. Behind them, another car turned onto the street and slowed. Daniel's. He stepped out quickly, his expression already strained, his movements less controlled than I had ever seen before. "Mom," he called as he approached, his voice tight. "What is going on?" I did not answer him immediately. Instead, I looked past him toward the second car that had just pulled in behind his. Melissa stepped out, her posture still composed, but there was something different now. Not control. Calculation under pressure. The 2 officials reached the front walk at the same time. One of them glanced at Daniel, then at Melissa, and said, "We are here regarding a complaint filed involving property fraud, identity misrepresentation, and unauthorized financial transactions." The words settled heavily into the space between us. Daniel looked at me, his expression shifting rapidly now. "You call them?" he asked, disbelief cutting through his voice. I met his gaze without hesitation. "No," I said. "I documented everything." The rest followed. Melissa stepped forward, her voice controlled but sharper now. "This is unnecessary," she said. "We can resolve this privately." One of the officials opened the folder and glanced down briefly. "Ma'am," he said, "based on the documentation submitted, this matter has already moved beyond private resolution." Daniel's shoulders dropped slightly, the weight of it settling in. "We were trying to help," he said again, but this time the words sounded smaller, thinner, like something he no longer fully believed himself. I stepped forward then, closing the distance just enough that he had to meet my eyes. "You had every chance to help me honestly," I said. "You chose something else." Behind him, the second official spoke to Melissa, asking for identification, requesting documentation, his tone firm but procedural. She handed over her driver's license, her movements still precise, but the edge was gone now. The confidence that had carried her through every step of this plan had nowhere left to stand. I turned slightly, stepping back into the house, leaving the door open. From inside, I could hear fragments of conversation, questions being asked, answers being given, the tone shifting steadily from explanation to accountability. I walked into the living room and sat down in my chair, the one that had been taken and returned, the fabric still familiar beneath my hands. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel it fully. Not just the loss that had come before, but the restoration of something far more important. Control, ownership, truth. Outside, the sound of a car, door closing echoed faintly. Then another. When I stood and walked back to the doorway, the driveway was nearly empty. Again, the county sedan was gone. Melissa's car was gone with it. Daniel stood alone near the curb, his hands at his sides, his posture smaller now, uncertain. He looked at me once more, as if searching for something that was no longer there. I did not step forward. I did not call his name. I simply held the door, then closed it gently but completely, the new lock clicking into place with a final, unmistakable sound. And for the first time since all of this began, there was no question left to answer, no plan left to uncover, no control left to reclaim. Everything that had been taken had been returned, and everything that had been hidden had been brought into the light exactly where it belonged.